All right, let's start with one of the, if not the biggest story of the day, the passing of President Carter here. And obviously, we've heard from just about everyone. You've heard throughout the morning on CBS of President Biden talking about it. Lots of lawmakers, even incoming President Trump, saying nice things about President Carter as well. But I have a simple question for you in the spirit of that. Will we remember any president like we're remembering Carter today? Or have the remaining living, or are the remaining living presidents too deeply connected to partisan politics? Angela, I'll start with you here. Just a reminder for those, the now living presidents are Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump.
Can you repeat the question? I want to make sure I understand.
Basically, are we going to remember presidents like we are with Carter? Lots of bipartisan support, lots of kind of kind words coming in. Does the office of president guarantee that you'll be remembered like that, or are we too deep in these partisan politics days to remember these next presidents?
This sounds more, I think it depends on if they die young. I think that to Mike's point earlier in the show where he said sometimes the way you're perceived in the moment is going to be different than the way you're perceived later on once the dust has settled and you actually have a chance to look at what they've done in the context of many, many years and see the impact of their decisions and their behaviors. So I think it depends on that piece of it. Mike, what say you?
I think that in this particular case, Jimmy Carter wasn't popular in a bipartisan fashion. I mean, he was popular marginally among Democrats, but that was sort of when you saw a lot of the historically Democrat voters, at least of the prior generation, which would be trade union members, moving rapidly to a more conservative voting pattern than they had been prior, when they felt like the Democrats represented unions, and Democrats still represented unions. However, politically, they became much more, as a group, they largely became conservative and voted for Ronald Reagan, someone who was very anti-union, but was aligned with them politically, and so they moved away from that. So it is, to your question, in today's world, can we have something like this? It's going to be very difficult. I mean, so I went back and looked at, here's a funny thing that people don't remember. Back in the 1960s and 1970s, and even into the 1980s, and maybe even the 1990s, I don't know. One of the big journalism features that was always worth a read was the Playboy interview. Now, the part of the reason for the Playboy interview was so you could give that false excuse as to why you looked at Playboy. But the main thing about the Playboy interview was that it was really a detailed interview. Here's the one, the Jimmy Carter one. And I remember the Jimmy Carter one because Jimmy Carter, famous quote from this interview when they asked him, because he was known he had a long marriage with Rosalind. I mean, they seemed to be sort of an ideal couple, but he always answered questions kind of weirdly candidly and in kind of a charming way. When asked about has he ever, because he's also very, very Christian. He was a very religious man. Have you ever thought about having an affair? Some question along those lines. I don't remember the question specifically. Here was his answer. I've looked on a lot of women with lust. I've committed adultery in my heart many times. But his point was, that's a human way to react to somebody you see who's good looking, and then you just don't do anything about it, which is what he also concluded in the interview. And so that is something that is kind of lost in time. I knew enough about it to look for it, right? That did not get repeated in social media again and again and again, blown up into its own separate story, and it wasn't. I mean, this actually became a little bit of a sensation when it happened, but it rose and fell and is not forgotten largely by history. Can we actually decide that we like someone who every single utterance gets dissected by the as someone was referred to, the chattering class, all of this stuff going on social media? I don't know. And we are generally, in our opinions, much more polarized than we used to be. We look at a conservative opinion or a liberal opinion and decide we know the whole person as based on that one thing that they think about vaccination, for example, or abortion. So can we? I don't know. Is there enough space we can create between us and a former president to actually sort of look at them in a realistic fashion? I guess we'll find out. Certainly Jimmy Carter is smiled upon by history in a way that I don't know we're going to see again. But he also did stuff. He did way more in retirement than, say, George Bush Sr. did. And that's no criticism of him. It's merely that This guy just like went on this mission to sort of like expand one of his great strengths in his presidency, which was how you get people talking again, how you go overseas and represent the peace process, among angry or warring factions and warring countries. Are we going to have another president who does that and just turn the post-presidency into a speaking gig? Right. A multi-$100,000 speaking gig? I don't know.